Xi Jinping will not attend the G20 summit this weekend. Premier Li Qiang will be going for the meeting in New Delhi instead. There was no explanation offered at today's Foreign Ministry briefing, simply a statement of the Premier's intended aims for this meeting in the President's stead. And more, Lo Minmin joins us live from Shanghai. Minmin, as we just heard, there's no official explanation for why Mr. Xi will not be able to attend the G20 summit in New Delhi. But what are you hearing about possible reasons for his not being able to turn up?
Well, experts are saying that there are several plausible reasons. For one, China's economy is stalling. We're looking at record high youth unemployment rates, very low investors and consumer confidence, and a property crisis looming. And so President Xi could feel that his time could be better spent at home dealing with the domestic crisis. And secondly, President Xi could also be more comfortable delegating now that he is in his third term in office, an unprecedented third term where he was able to assemble his own dream team. And we see President Xi going overseas just twice this year, compared to 4 times in the same period in 2019. And meanwhile, his number 2 man, Premier Li Qiang, was assigned important diplomatic tasks, including quite a successful trip to Europe earlier this year. And third, and perhaps the most significant, is that perhaps Mr. Xi doesn't quite like the guest list because it is being hosted by regional rival India, with whom China has a territorial dispute with over their shared border. And India had just last week protested against a new map issued by Beijing that indicated these disputed areas as China's own territory. The 2 countries have also expelled each other's journalists. And meanwhile, President Xi's so-called good friend, President Putin, is also not attending the summit, while the other attendees include US President Joe Biden, the Japanese Prime Minister, the Canadian Prime Minister, all of whom represent countries that China has some serious beef with. So experts say that the risk of an embarrassing off-chance encounter could have prompted Mr. Xi to stay at home.
I mean, very hypothetically, if we take that third reason as one of the reasons being considered by Mr. Xi, if there's a risk of embarrassment, equally, some could argue that missing this summit means a missed chance for him to mend relations precisely with the countries with which he might be not quite so satisfied with.
We'll miss the G20 summit being held in India this weekend, with his premier going in his place. It comes as China's economy faces a crisis in its housing market, a symptom fueled by debt due to overinvestment in unnecessary infrastructure.
In the city of Zunyi, there's a road that speaks volumes about the state of the Chinese economy. A multi-billion yuan expressway, one side unfinished and abandoned, a symbol of a system that's stuttering. On the other side of the hill, we find a connecting tunnel where the project has abruptly stopped. Pillars show where it was meant to continue, as do blocks of homes vacated, lives moved on to make space. Just a small number of residents have hung on here. Shi Chengli is one of them. She's lived here for 40 years, but her life is now in limbo, and she has a clear idea as to why.
The main reason is that there is no money. The state does not have any money left. I signed a contract. They said we would have a new apartment in 3 years. It will be the 5th year in September.
Everywhere you look here is infrastructure unfinished. In fact, Guizhou province is one of the poorest in China, and it is also the most indebted. And the reason is the model of growth that for so long drove such remarkable numbers. Huge borrowing, vast building, regardless of whether the projects were really needed. The problem now is that China is drowning in debt, and there is essentially nothing left to build. It means the country is littered with sites like this, the most visual representation of an economic model that was never sustainable.
Asma, what are the implications here, of President Xi skipping this week's G20 summit? They're rather significant. Xi Jinping has never skipped a G20 summit himself. In fact, China, ever since leaders have been meeting, I think going back to 2008, 2009, China has always been in attendance. This G20 summit is kind of really the international, I would say, premier gathering of international economies. It's really the scene of economic cooperation. And so by China not being there, some experts have told me it provides perhaps an opening for the United States to push through some of its agenda that it wanted that China may not have been on board with, and that's notably reforms at the World Bank. This is something that it's unclear if China wanted to endure, and it's something that really we've heard from this administration will be the centerpiece of what Joe Biden will be taking to India.